Oh, dear God, it's just me for now. Kelley is running a few minutes late, she said. Corporate job. Oh, and guess what? I only had to be by myself for about 7 seconds. Here we go. Welcome. Corporate job, right?
God damn it, corporate job.
Yeah. Well,
I'm here now.
all good now? All the deadlines met?
No, they're not. But
No.
They're not, but that's okay.
Ugh.
I'm here now. Hello, everyone. Good to see you all.
Indeed. Happy Monday. Happy deadlines.
Happy Monday. I woke up this morning to Stephen, like, here's our agenda for today's live stream. I'm like,
and I never send an agenda. And I just picked a really bad time to do so. At 1 o'clock in the morning, you woke up to like, here's more stuff for you to think about.
I know. Like, I already had like 2 meetings this morning.
Well, I didn't send it in the sense of like, hey, make a PowerPoint.
No, which is good because you don't get one.
That'd be kind of a dick move. It's like, yeah, no, it's like we're 12 hours away from the stream, but can you put together a presentation?
Yeah.
Well,
yeah, I did not put together a PowerPoint. So for those of you in chat who are hoping for a PowerPoint from me,
for all of us visual learners, maybe analogies will help.
Does anybody like PowerPoints? I mean, as someone who has made thousands of them as a former professor, I don't think anybody enjoyed them.
I can't say I've ever saw a PowerPoint that I was just like really stoked about.
I know. If I have my way when teaching, I like to just stand up with chalk and talk. But, you know, that's not really a thing you do on a live stream. So.
Yeah.
Brandon's like, Stephen promised us a PowerPoint.
I mean, promise no such thing.
If Stephen wants to deliver on that promise,
we can make the PowerPoint together as we go.
Oh, God. Let's not. The only thing worse than a PowerPoint meeting is one where you build a PowerPoint together during a meeting.
Oh, we got to make sure that we put all the sound effects and transitions and stuff in there.
Oh, God.
Oh, Luke is here to learn about photosynthesis.
I mean, I'm happy to talk about it. I can do that. It's a thing that's always here, and we'll talk about it.
So the reason I wanted to do the stream about photosynthesis and just in general about the role of CO2 in specifically a low-tech tank is because every time we talk about CO2, we both have CO2 injected tanks. Sure. And we both know the benefits of added CO2. And then it gets to the point where like, I think everyone, when they're talking about CO2 and no CO2, it gets shortened to like no CO2, meaning low tech tank doesn't mean zero CO2. It just means no CO2 injection. And I think that kind of has gotten to a point where people are starting to think that when we're talking about CO2, it only means CO2 injection, and that CO2 is not essential. It's a boost. It's a supplement to plant growth.
It is not a supplement. It is. There are really only 2 most important things for plants. Well, there are 3. Okay, there's water, not an issue in a planted tank. And then there's CO2, and there's light.
Yeah.
You have to have those 3 things. Technically, you also need oxygen, but plants do make oxygen as a byproduct. So
and yeah.
They
so I posted this poll quiz type thing. Quite a like more answers than I usually get for a poll.
People were excited. They were excited to weigh in.
Yeah. True or false? Yeah. Aquarium plants need CO2 in order to grow. 54% say true, 46% say false. And now I know that there is some percentage who said false that just in their mind had CO2 supplementation, like added CO2 on their mind. But yeah.
You know what this reminds me of? So back when I was a professor, I was teaching cell biology. So this would have been for like sophomores in biology. So they had already taken biology 1 and biology 2 and chemistry 1 and chemistry 2, and they were in organic. So they were not beginners, but they were not like seniors in biology. And I was talking about cell membranes. It was a lecture about cell membranes. And ion transport is an important part of cell membranes because all organisms, not just plants or animals, they need to maintain proper balance of ions in the cell versus out of the cell, because sometimes they want the concentration higher on the inside than on the outside, or vice versa. And so cells have transporters that either passively or actively bring ions into the cell. So when I say ions, I mean things like sodium ions, potassium ions, magnesium ions,
Charged
charged particles. Okay, so plants do this too, animals do this too. And so ions are often called electrolytes because if you have a solution of these, they conduct electricity because they're charged. So if you have some salt water, you can run a current through it. Okay, so that's why they're called electrolytes. So everybody needs electrolytes, right? Plants need them. We need them. Everybody needs them. So when I asked all my students, so where do we get our electrolytes from? And they look at me and I'm like, come on, where do you get them from? Where do I get my electrolytes from? And they're like, well, like Gatorade.
Brondo.
And I'm like, well, okay, yeah, there's electrolytes in Gatorade, but did my ancestors, thousands of years ago drink Gatorade? Where did they get their electrolytes from? And they just stare at me and they just look at me. And I'm like, how about from food? I mean, you eat these, right? And so sometimes something is so basic and that you take it for granted.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, and I mean, and you look at terrestrial plant science, how often is CO2 brought up in that sense? Because
Never.
it is taken for granted.
Well, I mean, you do talk about CO2 regulation with photorespiration, and you talk about like stomate regulation, which so terrestrial plants have pores on them, which allow gases to exchange.
But in terms of like someone who just has a greenhouse, like,
you don't think about it ever,
right?
but what you think about all the time is water.
Yes.
But you never think about water in a planted tank. You never think about if your plants have enough water. They have enough water. But CO2 you think about a lot. So, but I think that most people know that plants need CO2, but they somehow they forget about it. It's just like most biology students know that, I don't make my own electrolytes and I don't get them from Gatorade, because you don't need Gatorade to live. But
well, I also think that there are people who think that terrestrial plant science and aquatic plant science are so far apart. I mean, there are some things that are different, but the principles of how they grow
a lot
are
of
the
it
same.
is a plant,
Right?
And there are certain fundamental ways that plants work, and algae also photosynthesizes. So I think it's good to remember. So what does carbon do? Why do plants need carbon? Why do I need carbon? Right? Like I have to get my carbon too. So I get my carbon by eating plants, right? I either eat plants or I eat things that eat plants. I cannot fix my own carbon. I do not photosynthesize. So, but both plants and animals, they use carbon for the same thing. They use it as a storage molecule for sugar, and that sugar can get burned into energy, but they also use it as a building block. So in the case of
like literally the raw materials to build nearly half of the plant structure.
Oh, more than half of the plant structure. So our carbon containing molecules. Because fats have carbon and proteins have carbon. And most of a plant is made of carbohydrates. So most of a plant is made of something called cellulose, which are long chains of glucose monomers. and that makes up the cell wall. So so cellulose is it's insoluble fiber. So if you eat cellulose, you can't digest it. It just goes right through you. But that's mostly what a plant is made of. So cell walls are made of that. So all that carbon, so plants, how they get their carbon, they don't eat other things. They fix it from the atmosphere. And it doesn't matter if it's an aquatic plant, doesn't matter if it's algae. This is what
life is carbon. Like,
or if
we
it's a
are
corn
carbon-based
plant
life
or a
forms.
tree. Yeah.
They haven't
So
discovered other life forms that don't have carbon, but maybe.
right, but we're all, yeah. But the difference is somebody had to fix that from atmospheric CO2. I can't fix my own carbon. Stephen can't fix his own carbon. Your dog can't fix their own carbon. But we eat other organisms that have.
Right.
So that's where it comes from. Yeah. And it just reminds me of when I ask students, like, where do you get your electrolytes from? It's like, you get them from food. Like,
yeah, and they're thinking of electrolytes as like something that you just add as a supplement to your body, not
right, but
necessarily
it's not a
part of
supplement. It's
being alive.
essential. Yeah, it's essential. And carbon is it's essential too. So Aquatic News Network has a great question. So if we actually increase the CO2 in our atmosphere, all the plants on the planet would thrive better. Yes and no. So there was a time in evolutionary history where the levels of CO2 were increased. So during the Carboniferous period, which preceded the dinosaurs by quite a lot, the levels of atmospheric carbon were much higher than they are now. Right now, the atmosphere is only about 0.04% carbon. But back then it was higher. I don't know how much higher, but it was substantially higher. And you saw enormous plant life. You had these like enormous tree ferns would grow. And there was so much plant life that it would die off. And, over eons, it became pressurized. And it became the oil and coal underneath our soil.
Yeah, like the entire atmosphere, Tommy said, like was higher pressure.
And so many plants did well, but it's also no, in that some plants might only be adapted for the levels of CO2 that they have.
Now there are certain plants I know that get supplemented CO2 just for faster growth. For example, a tobacco farm.
Yeah.
They can use additional CO2.
Yeah,
I'm pretty sure marijuana also,
it.
Same thing.
Yeah. The other downside to increasing CO2 levels in the atmosphere is it traps heat and our temperatures are rising. And that is very, very bad for plants. It's very bad for us. It's very bad for animals. It's very bad for everything. So a lot of things are going to go extinct from heat. So, but in general, more CO2 is pretty great for plants. So, yeah.
And so right now, our atmosphere CO2 levels outdoors is what, 400 something, a little over 400.
Yeah, it's like
0.04%.
0.04%.
Yeah.
So that would be about 400 ppm. Yeah, so it's not much. We don't have much. I mean, compare that is made of nitrogen.
Yeah.
So, and that's about I think 70% is nitrogen, which is an inert gas. Very few organisms can break that bond of N2 because it's a triple bond. It's very hard to break that. There's some bacteria that can. So, and they can fix nitrogen, but most things can't. Most plants can't. They have some symbiotic bacteria sometimes that can fix it, so they can't either. But
so compare that 400 parts per million of CO2 in the atmosphere to, first of all, a CO2 injected tank is a 30 to 40.
30 to 40, yeah.
And then if you've got no CO2 injection, you're just running a low tech tank like most of us are. It's 3 to 4. It's a factor of 10, or it's a factor of 100 from atmospheric CO2.
Nothing, and that's why your plants can grow some. Is because you have some CO2.
It is the reason your plants can grow is that that CO2 exists in the water.
Yeah, but it's not much, and that's why they don't grow fast.
Right.
And so we get if you inject CO2, you get up to about 30 or 40 ppm. But if I were to take some of these plants, unless they're obligately aquatic, which very few of our plants are, if I were to take them out and as long, give them a little time to adjust, but let them grow terrestrially, they would grow so much faster. So much faster. And that's why if you ever have a plant like rotalas or something and you let it grow out of your tank, you'll notice that the lower leaves will just die off. And that's because the plant's like, aha, I have hit
it's like,
the
finally we can
CO2.
be efficient.
I'm not going to waste my time with all these lower leaves that are limited for CO2, even in an injected tank. They're still limited. They still only have 1/10 the CO2 that they would in the atmosphere. And so then they'll grow much faster, and they'll only grow the immersed type leaves.
And so now that they're using more CO2, what else are they using more of?
Oh, they use up everything else more, all the other nutrients. So nitrogen. So the most important nutrient, okay, is carbon. If you look at the dry weight of a plant, it's carbon. You cannot, there is no Excel. You can dump all the Excel you want in your tank. All it's going to do is eventually kill your fish if you add too much of it.
Well, the other thing to know about Excel is, like, in the best case scenario, let's assume that for some reason, somehow Excel has bioavailable carbon. It's not been proven that it does, but if it does, in the amounts that we're dosing into the water column, you're not adding all that much. It's also not a constant supply of it like you get from atmospheric equilibrium or from injection. And so it's something that would be used up with like within the first few minutes to an hour or so.
It's pretty small. It's pretty small. And the thing is, if you add 30 or 40 ppm of it, you're going to kill your fish, because turns out it's a poison. It's a carcinogen. It's a nasty compound, and I would recommend you never use it in your tanks.
And also, I see questions from chat coming in. I'm starring them and saving them so that whenever we're done talking about this, we can get to the questions. So feel free to keep asking, but we're gonna keep going with this for a minute.
So I don't know what I was saying. I don't remember.
So growing out of the tank, using all the nutrients, the most important nutrient is carbon.
Yep, most important nutrient. And then the 3 macronutrients, the second most important is nitrogen, and then phosphates, and then potassium. Okay. And nitrate is not near as important as carbon. So plants need way more carbon than they do nitrogen. So nitrates are pretty much only found in plants in amino acids, which make up proteins. But a plant is mostly made of cellulose and lignin. So lignin is wood. So woody plants would be made of that. And those are carbohydrates. They're carbohydrates. So they don't have any nitrogen in them at all. So proteins, they have some proteins. Plants make some proteins. But if you think about just think about your diet. If you want to increase the amount of protein you eat, you need to eat a lot of plants to get there, because plants don't have that much protein. So amino acids each amino acid has at least 1 molecule of nitrogen in them. Okay. So
a quick diversion from that, since we're talking about using nutrients, and you mentioned earlier active transport versus passive diffusion. So which one, is there one that is more important? Is there one that is more preferable in an aquatic plant? Are they both necessary?
No, they're both necessary, and it just depends. So active transport is something a cell does when they need to have greater concentration of something inside of a membrane as opposed to outside of a membrane. And active transport, it costs money. So it costs ATP.
But I think you mentioned in our last stream that ATP production is almost like a energy neutral sort of thing, right?
It's pretty neutral, but it still costs energy, right? And so the plant has to, or, the cell, whatever cell it is, has to expend energy to do that. And they do that just because sometimes you need a concentration gradient forming. So for instance, in photosynthesis, part of it, and in respiration, there's something called an electron transport chain. And the energy, the energy of those ions crossing the membrane drives other chemical reactions. So, I mean, cells do that on purpose. They make gradients. So it's, the only difference is like active transport costs money. That's true in all cells. Like, we have sodium potassium transporters in our neurons. And so we are pumping in 3 potassium for every 2 sodium to maintain a gradient, an electrical gradient across all of our cells. And we expend a lot of energy to do that. And that's why, even if you're not moving, you get tired and you get hungry because you're still expending energy just existing.
So active transport, we're talking through the roots, for example. Is that
active transport is just across a cell membrane? It has nothing to do with roots.
Nothing to do with roots.
Per cell. It's just in a cell.
Gotcha.
And you have a membrane. If you want to bring in something against a concentration gradient, it costs money. That's all it is. So, and some of that happens in the roots, some of it doesn't. It just depends what the organism needs.
Yeah. So we, like, for example, root feeders, like we call things like Amazon swords root feeders, crypts root feeders. It's not that they cannot take in nutrients to their leaves. It's that they put on so much plant mass that it kind of is a benefit for them to have nutrient access at their roots. That's more like an exclusive.
Well, that's because most of them are evolved to be terrestrial plants. Mm-hmm. And you can only take in things that are dissolved in a solution.
And I mean, so many of our aquarium plants are evolved to be terrestrial, or at least marginal.
So like a crypt is evolved to be they mostly live on land or in like swampy land. Mm-hmm. And so you can't take in, even terrestrial plants like you grow in your garden, you can do foliar feedings and they'll take in nutrients through their leaves. Like if you're fertilizing outside and you spray the leaves with, a solution of water with fertilizer in it, it can take in those nutrients. There's nothing to say it can't. It's just that they don't encounter, getting sprayed with fertilizer that often. Right. So they need to take it up through a solution, and it's in the ground for terrestrial plants. So
back to carbon. What drives a plant's need for a certain amount of carbon?
They need it to grow.
But what drives their like metabolic rate and how much they can take in or need to take in?
I mean, it's controlled by how much light they have and how much is available, right? Mm-hmm. But like a plant isn't making a decision, I think I'm going to photosynthesize this much today. It's not what they do. They're not deciding anything.
It's based on their environment entirely, based on availability.
Yeah.
So if you have light driving that metabolism and their ability to take in carbon, what happens when there is not enough carbon? Like it's like the CO2 compensation point is too high.
Have some plasticity, metabolic plasticity of how they respond to low carbon, to low light. They can do other things. So they can express more proteins to fix carbon, which is part of the Calvin cycle. They can do that. They can increase the amount of photoreceptors on their cell. They can make more chlorophyll, so they can make darker green leaves to try to take in some of that. Just like if there's too much light, they can make sort of natural sunscreens to screen some of that out so they don't get fried. So that would be like anthocyanins or natural sunscreen. So plants have some like physiological plasticity to respond to their environment.
Right. To a certain point.
Yeah, and it takes them time to do that, just like it takes you time to respond to your environment, right? So like in the, in the fall when it first started getting cold, like, oh God, pile on the sweaters,
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
but by April, like a 60-degree day, I'm like, oh, tank top day, so my physiology changed somewhat over the months. So plants, they change
Yeah.
their physiology too. They do things to respond to being cold, for instance.
Yeah, well, they adjust to extremes to an extent possible, adjust to deficiencies to an extent possible.
Yeah.
But carbon is going to drive their ability to grow. And there's a certain point where,
It's one of the things. I mean,
well, it's
light
their
is
ability to use,
really
it's their,
important.
the light drives demand for carbon, drives their ability to even use the nutrients that are available, like the
Yeah, I mean, the
NPK and
thing is, if they're
micros.
not growing, they're not going to take up more phosphates or or potassium because they're just not going to need it.
Right. So you can put you can put all of that in the water as much as your heart's content. But
It's not
if
going to do it.
CO2 is limited, and it
Yeah,
always is in a low tech tank, then it's
yeah.
not going to make a difference. And so what happens when that carbon level is depleted? So like their concentration gradient is so low that they're not really even taking in additional carbon.
Yeah, they
What
just
kind of what do you start seeing in terms
they just
of
stop growing.
deficiencies?
Yeah, they just stop growing. So
Hmm.
you see like and like you see like maybe your plants melt a little bit.
Yeah.
Like the tips of your Java ferns will melt. If you
You
have
get
Blixia japonica, it melts
necrosis. Yeah, I
fast.
mean the necrosis
It melts
starts,
fast. Yeah. It
um,
just dies. It just dies. But
and then
you just see slower growth, less growth.
yeah, and then you see that, but you also and then you see the deficiencies because they're not able to use those nutrients anyway,
Yeah.
and those deficiencies they can resemble what you might find on one of those deficiency
They
charts.
can resemble it, but here's the thing. What does a plant deficiency even look like? I mean, there's a chart
Right.
floating around on the
It
web.
depends on the plant for sure.
That chart is based on, I don't know, some artist felt like drawing something that
I
day.
thought it was based on some agricultural crop, and
It's
then
not
like it
even
turns
that
out to be
because,
not
like,
even yeah.
it's not even that because, like, iron deficiency is the most well documented terrestrial deficiency. If you Google like iron deficiency, you'll see
Mhm.
something called chlorosis. There are tons of pictures out there, and that's absolutely what it looks like. So, iron deficiency in plants, what it looks like is the veins of the plant look very yellow, very, very yellow.
Yeah.
It's called chlorosis. And you fix that with it's either a pH issue, a water issue, or ultimately it's an iron uptake issue. And you have to
Right,
do
because
something to
the
adjust
pH
that.
issue is that you're using the wrong chelation, for
Right.
your pH.
Yeah, like
It's
if
not
you have
able to
really
dissolve.
high pH, or like you have leaching of your iron out of like of a potted plant, you can fix it with chelated iron. So for instance, over the summer, my lotuses were starting to look chlorotic. And so I bought some chelated iron, which is very expensive actually. And what
The
I did was
what's the is I forgot which one it is. It's like 4
it's
letters.
like
Yeah.
DHT something. I can't
Yeah.
remember, but it's iron chelate. And it's the one that like you can buy for high pH soil.
Mhm.
And it's kind of expensive. But what I did was I took like some paper and I put a spoonful of it and I made like a little twist of it. And then I shoved that down into the pot. You can also just dissolve it in the
Mhm.
water. There were no fish in there because this was a small container, but
Right.
I made little twists of it. And after a couple of weeks, the chlorosis did go away. So it worked. But like I knew that was an iron deficiency. Whereas like
Now, would you
I
possibly see chlorosis signs just from carbon deficiency? Simply
I
because, like,
don't think
every
so. No, I
photosynthesis
don't
has
think so.
stopped?
I have no, I don't think so because I have accidentally run out of CO2 and let it go for like a month before. You
So
don't see
it's just the
chlorosis.
melt, and it's the
You see
melt
the
and
melt,
that
the shitty growth, like
it kinda
also
manifests in, like,
you lose color. Like
You
you lose color. That's a
you can
big thing.
see
Like
things
your red
like
plants don't look
holes
as
in
much.
leaves depending on how it melts, because
Yeah.
necrosis can start from the inner leaf. It can start from the outside. I've seen leaves curling as well if there's a
Smelting.
carbon deficiency. It's just there's a
Your
lot of
like if
different
you
things.
have fish that will kind of rasp on a plant, they'll do it even more because it's now soft and juicy and rotting.
Yeah.
So like you'll
That's a
get
good one. I didn't even
more
think
of
about
that.
that. Like, yeah,
Yeah.
the fish start to get an appetite for it.
Yeah, because like it's it's now they can digest it because like a lot of our fish can't digest cellulose, just like we don't digest cellulose either. It passes through us. But if it starts decaying, a bacteria is pre-digesting it for them, and so then they can eat it.
Mhm.
So yeah, but
Um, so yeah, it's like that kind of leaf deterioration can look a lot of different ways.
yeah.
And in a low tech tank, what are the odds that it's because you're not fertilizing enough? When you have
Ex
people who can grow plants just fine with fish poo, I'm
Yeah,
one of them.
yeah.
Like I've got
I mean,
tanks
if
where I
you have
don't.
low stocking,
Mhm.
maybe you don't have enough. But if you have really high stocking and you're feeding a lot,
The other thing
here's the
though is
thing, fertilizing.
if you do have low stocking, part of the CO2 content in low tech is from respiration.
Yeah,
And
there's
I
some.
noticed
There's
in
some, yeah.
some tanks that are more heavily stocked, I do see a little
Little
like
bit.
it. I mean, granted, it's hard to measure CO2 content in a low tech
I
tank
mean,
because
especially if you have low KH water where CO2 is
right,
more bioavailable, respiration from your fish is going to make a difference because fish, just like us, create CO2 as a waste product. I'm inhaling O2, I'm exhaling CO2.
yeah.
And your plants also, they respire too.
So
So they both photosynthesize and they respire.
so glucose, mineral, light deficiency as well. They're common. I mean, the glucose, mineral deficiencies,
Glucose
those
and
are related to the carbon deficiency
yeah, so here, yeah,
bottleneck.
glucose deficiency, we never talk about that with plants because it's not telling the complete story. So plants make their own glucose and they make it from three things: light, water, and CO2. Well, which one of those is deficient?
Right.
Can't say. If it's a terrestrial plant, okay, CO2 is not deficient. It's
And light
either light.
deficiencies are pretty easy to diagnose too.
Yeah, I mean, if you have something really shaded, like
Mhm.
you know. And light deficiency used to be a big problem in this hobby because plant lights were expensive and hard to come by. And
And now
ones
we
that were
have
high powered.
a
And now
lot of
like
light.
you can buy a NICRU light that's good enough to get the job done.
It's
And
not
it's
just good
like
enough
20 or 30
for
bucks.
the average low tech tank. If you
Some of them
take
are
one of
too
those
bright.
you take one of those night crew lights and you put it on like a 10-gallon tank, it is incredibly
Yeah.
way too bright.
Yeah. With bigger tanks, that's the only time where maybe you're not getting enough light to get where you want to
Mhm.
go. So this is a deep tank. This is my 90. And I bought another Chihiro's light for it because I just wasn't able to get where I needed to go with that.
Because you have the carbon to meet the demand
Yeah. Well, I also
from
have
that light.
lids, and lids filter some of your light. And I'm
Right.
never not going to have lids. And I'm also never going to be like super on top of cleaning my lids every week.
Oh my
So,
god, I got some ugh, yeah, I
yeah.
hate them.
But saying just glucose deficiency is not telling the whole story. And that's why it's better to say light, CO2, or water, depending on the plant, depending on the atmosphere, or, depending on the environment.
Yeah.
So Mandarin Gobi asks, is nitrogen deficiency a common deficiency? I mean, sure.
In a CO2 injected tank, it can be
Yeah, I mean, in
in
mine, like
a
they chew
normal
through nitrogen.
right, in
I
a
have
normal
to
stock low tech
fertilize
tank,
every day.
basically never. In like even I mean, I guess if you have a lot of immersed growth, you have a lot of like pothos and crap growing out of there, and you never fertilize and you're light on
Yeah,
the feeding, possibly. But it's still in low tech. It's 90 something percent
yeah.
going to be a carbon, a CO2 deficiency.
Even in a low tech tank, you do need to fertilize a little bit. Now, how
Yeah.
much is a little bit? How much is the right amount? I can't tell you. You have to experiment with that.
Mm-hmm.
But once a week, a little bit of fertilizer. It
I
can
pump
help
in
you.
some easy
You need
green
a little
after I do a
space.
water change in low
Yeah.
tech. And then
Yeah.
sometimes midweek I might. Like the mosh pit, for example, there's a billion bajillion guppies in there. You would think it would have high nitrate, but not with
There's a
all the
lot of
crap I got
plants.
growing out of the back of it.
Yeah,
It's
and that's the
I
thing.
gotta
If you have any
fertilize.
plants growing out of it, like I have to fertilize every day because I have so much immersed grown
Mm-hmm.
plants. And those chew through nitrogen. So, I mean, you can have some and just a general purpose, all in one fertilizer once a week is a good place to start for low tech. So, but if you're injecting CO2, you are going to need a lot more because your plants are growing more, and growing plants need fertilizer. Plants that aren't growing fast don't. And that's why, like, for instance, like seedlings, I've got a lot of seedlings started right now. So they're growing, but they're itty bitty. They don't need to
Right.
be
They don't need a lot of
fertilized
fuel.
yet. They don't, they're not, I don't have like a huge plant mass there to support. So, I have to wait till they're a little bigger to fertilize them. So fertilizing is a bit of an art,
Yeah. And
take some
still,
trial and error. Following the package directions is a good place to start. I mean, like Easy
right.
Green for low tech tanks, they recommend 1 pump per gallon once a week. That's a good place to start.
I will say though, when you have plants that are actively growing and are healthy and you're fertilizing, you do get a good bit more wiggle room with the fertilizer and preventing algae growth, because the plants are out competing algae very efficiently. And so the fertilizer stops, like overdosing fertilizer stops mattering as much. Now you definitely can, but
yeah, I mean,
it's
I
not a
don't think
matter
I've
of like,
ever overdosed fertilizer with.
it's hard.
I mean,
It's hard to do.
yeah, I mean, at a certain point, I'll just forget to fertilize, and then I'll be back to square one. I mean, so it's pretty hard to do with
Right.
a a CO2 injected tank. So JT Keeping Fish says, to be honest, I literally never fertilize if you're not injecting CO2, and especially if you have higher KH water, which means you don't have much bioavailable CO2. Maybe you don't need to. Maybe you don't need to. If you
It's
want to try and see what it does for you, maybe once a week, half a dose, see where you get.
so little is needed. In fact, so on Facebook is where Tom Barr is posting most of his goings on nowadays, and he posted this this low tech tank, beautiful, no CO2 injection at all. And he's like the father of EI dosing, which is like dose a lot, displace the excess nutrients at the end of the week. He mentioned in this low tech tank that was growing very well with very, very low light. He was dosing about 1/20th of EI dosing. He was scaling it back based on carbon availability.
Sounds about right.
Yeah.
So amazing spirit, I'm pronouncing that wrong, says, I heard some CO2 hurt some fish. It's all about levels. It's kind of like I have to have sodium in my diet, right? You need sodium
There's a
to
lethal
live.
amount of sodium.
But if I were to eat like a half a cup of salt, it would kill me. Right? So the dosage matters. The dosage matters. The dosage makes the poison. And I'm injecting enough CO2 that my fish are not bothered. Now, if you inject too much, your fish are going to die. And that's why Stephen and I always recommend that people buy a good quality regulator. Because if your regulator fails, because it's a shitty regulator, and that's what shitty regulators do, it can kill your fish.
Yep. And if you don't want to inject CO2, and you are having a low tech tank and you are having some kind of issue with some sort of some sort of like melt or necrosis or something, I honestly think, and this is I have done this myself with all of my low tech tanks, dim the crap out of the light and you will see better results, because you have to match carbon availability or nothing will do well.
Right. You can get away with a lot though if you have low pH water because you have more
Because it's more,
bioavailable
yeah,
carbon in your
exactly. You have
water.
to. That's the other thing. It's like
Those.
you have low tech and you have very high KH. You have those factors
Yeah,
working against you.
that's why it's really hard to grow plants in high
Yeah.
pH water. Even when you inject CO2, it's hard. So,
But
what
based on there is a question.
I had a question back there. I didn't want to miss it. Alec Kumanoff asked, "Is there any breakdown of what
That's literally the one I was about to pull
Oh,
up.
okay. Now C3, I've never heard it called Atslack. So C3 photosynthesis is garden variety photosynthesis. And then there's C4 and CAM metabolism. So C4 and CAM metabolism are special flavors of photosynthesis for only special plants. So the enzyme that fixes carbon in plants is called rubisco. And while it is arguably the most important enzyme on earth, it is the cornerstone of life. It's a shitty enzyme.
It's
And it
kind of
has
stupid.
very poor substrate specificity. So the substrate.
Can you clarify what you mean by substrate?
I'm getting there.
Okay.
I'm getting there. So substrate specificity means how it's like a lock and a key, right? So ideally you would want a lock to fit only one key, right? But in this case, this lock kind of fits two keys. Okay, and the two keys it fits are CO2 and oxygen. So we would want it to fit CO2, right? So what happens with normal the Calvin cycle, which is the part of photosynthesis that fixes the carbon, is it makes fixes the CO2 into a 5-carbon sugar called rubisco, and that gets cleaved into 2 molecules of phosphoglyceric acid, which get converted to something else. So they're 2 3-carbon fragments. That's why it's called C3 photosynthesis. The cycle turns, on it goes. Okay. What happens though is there are certain conditions in which CO2 levels become very low in a plant. And they become low because if you have water stress, so plants they control gas exchange through these little pores on their leaves called stomata or stomates. The plural would be stomata.
Now, do aquatic plants have stomata, aquatic plant leaves converted? No. They don't.
No. So the reason they have stomata is if they didn't have them, they would be losing all their water because all gases can just freely exchange. They're just pores through these holes. Okay. And so ideally what they want to do is for the oxygen to go out and the CO2 to go back in. But the problem is water vapor also leaves. And this is a process called transpiration. You have water coming up through the roots and it goes out through the pores. Okay. And if you have lots and lots of water, like you have, you live in Louisiana and it rains every week, or, you live in Indiana and you got 2 inches of rain over the weekend, you've got plenty of water. So those stomata can always be open. But what if you have water stress? Okay, losing all your water for a plant is very, very bad because if a plant loses all its water, 1, it can't do photosynthesis because photosynthesis it requires water. So, and 2, plants they don't have bones, right? Like, trees have wood, but like an herbaceous plant, like a basil plant or something, okay, they don't have bones. They're held up by water pressure, which is called turgor pressure. And if, a plant starts to wilt, like that, right? It falls over. So plants need water for that. So losing all their water is bad. So what they do is they close their pores. Okay. But then what happens is, so their pores are closed. And so CO2 can't get in, but plants also do respiration, just like we do respiration, right? And, but a byproduct of they're still doing photosynthesis. This has nothing to do with respiration. They're still doing photosynthesis. Yeah. What's the waste product of photosynthesis? oxygen. So oxygen levels are building up. No CO2 is getting in. Well, Rubisco is a shitty enzyme. It can
sees
also,
all this oxygen.
Yeah, it can also bind to Rubisco. And instead of cleaving into making a 6-carbon fragment, it makes a 5-carbon fragment. Okay. And so that's what C4 photosynthesis is, or that's, that's not good. So you can't do the Calvin cycle with that. You can't fix any carbon because you didn't bind it. So there are plants that have strategies to deal with that. So one is C4 photosynthesis. And what that does is it separates the light independent and light dependent parts of photosynthesis spatially. So it has all the light reactions happen in they are called bundle cells, and then the dark reactions happen in another. And so you don't have too much oxygen building up, right?
Right. So it's like stored up instead of like actively diffusing.
So, and then CAM metabolism, which is crassulation acid metabolism. So that is only that what it does is it separates the light dependent and light independent reactions temporally. So instead of going ahead and doing the full turn of the Calvin cycle, what it does is it stores it in an organic acid. And then at nighttime, when, oxygen levels will be low because and the pores can open back up, then it finishes it up. So that's crassulation acid metabolism. And now, what plants do that? Not many plants do this. Most plants do regular photosynthesis. The only plants that have evolved that I'm aware of not to, C4 plants, are grasses. So corn is the most famous example. Another famous example is crabgrass. So if you have a lawn, you might notice that at the beginning of the summer, it looks really nice. And it has like the Kentucky bluegrass is real fine and dark green and pretty.
That's where I'm at right now.
But later on in the season, it gets taken over by crabgrass. And that's because crabgrass can do C4 photosynthesis. It's very drought resistant. So, and then CAM metabolism, it's called crassulation acid metabolism for a reason. And that's because it's done by plants in the genus Crassula. So if you've ever grown a jade plant, which is a kind of succulent, so they live in deserts, they do CAM photosynthesis. Anything that's a Crassula can. And I'm not aware of anything else. So, and that would be none of our aquarium plants have evolved to do that. And they also, physiologically, they lose their stomata, right? Because there's no worries about losing water. They have all the water they want when they're growing underwater. So they don't need to have that physiological thing of closing and opening stomata to prevent water from leaving the plant. They don't do transpiration, right? They have all the water they need.
So there are some aquatic plants that instead of using in lieu of CO2, they will always prefer CO2, obviously, but in a CO2 limited environment, they do have what is it, carbonic anhydrase?
Yeah, carbonic anhydrase, but that is not photorespiration.
No, but we're talking about like adapting to
so they can do use carbonic anhydrase to convert
bicarbonates
into CO2 to use. So for instance, Vallisneria, it grows really well in hard water.
Yeah.
One of the few things it does, and it's an obligate aquatic, meaning it only grows in an aquatic environment. And so it can do that, but that is different from C4 photosynthesis, photorespiration. It's a different thing. It's just another add-on that it's done to convert something in their environment to CO2 to then do regular bog standard photosynthesis. But most plants aquatic plants that I'm aware of don't do that. It's very few use carbonate that I'm aware of. So like Vallisneria is.
So there's Vallisneria, there's Elodia, there's Naja, and there's
Naja's grass. It's not many.
Yeah, there. In fact, I have a copy of I have an e-copy of Diane Wallstad's book, and she has a list of plants that can use bicarbonates.
Yeah, it's not many because there are not many of our plants that we grow are obligate aquatics.
Yeah, it really is limited to those obligate aquatics, and they're not all like the best looking plants when you're
and they would all still.
Gardens.
Here's the thing: they would all still prefer CO2. They will all grow better if you inject CO2. They will all grow better if you have low pH water.
Hornwort's another one that uses bicarbonates. So let's say you have your low tech, you have a limited CO2 environment, you have light just blasting the shit out of hornwort floating up there. And then under that similar lighting, you've got an Anubias that is just looking drab. Its leaves are turning yellow and melting. Your hornwort is growing like gangbusters. Like, you can measure hornwort growth per day, like inches per day.
Yeah.
So would you consider that, given that Anubias is not a bicarbonate user?
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's one thing. My first idea though is it might be you're blocking light. I mean, Anubias it doesn't like to be blasted by light. It likes to be shaded a little bit, but still it needs sunlight. It's kind of like people are always like, "Well, my plants look like shit, but my floaters look great."
Yeah.
Like, because you're blocking all your light. I mean, sometimes the answer can be easy that way, and you should just have a little less hornwort. Because
I mean, there are a lot of things to look at.
You block the light. So it might be a carbon deficiency. It might be a light deficiency. I doubt it's a nutrient deficiency, though.
Yeah, because I mean, there are a lot of things to look at before a nutrient deficiency, lighting and carbon being the primary ones. And then in addition to that, it's like good husbandry. Like, are those Anubias leaves coated in garbage? Like, are they coated in detritus that are just like blocking that barrier? And
in my experience, Anubias leaves, when they get spot algae on them, just cut them off.
Yeah, they're done. Off. They're toast.
Because like you just need to grow better leaves. The plant, just cut them off. They'll grow new leaves from their rhizome. So like I'm looking at my Anubias right now, and I'm like, so those leaves look like crap. Just go through there and give them a trim.
So I'm going to start with some of the questions that I had started from the beginning. So how would one measure atmospheric CO2?
I mean, you could do it with a gas chromatograph. I don't know how. Yeah, I don't. I mean, yeah. Probably the best way.
I know it's higher indoors. Like it can be several times higher indoors.
Yeah, that's why, it's I mean, there are lots of reasons why in your home you should have some gas exchange. If your house is buttoned up a little too tight, like carbon monoxide can build up. That's another thing that's even worse for you than CO2.
Yeah, not good.
Like just having some gas exchange is good for you. If you have too much CO2 in your environment, you start to get fatigued. You don't feel very good. And that's when it's time to get some fresh air. Go outside.
Do you think having a room that is just like where the walls are just lined with pothos and shit could actually affect your health?
I don't think it. The thing is like, we're evolved.
They should be taking in more CO2 than they're.
I mean, there's some evidence that like they also can remove some pollutants from the atmosphere. Some plants can. Having more oxygen doesn't necessarily make you feel better. I mean, they don't make it, and also they don't make enough to make that big of a difference. Like, I think more. The bigger boost to your health would be the psychological benefits of being surrounded by green plants. It makes you happy. So, but I don't think the pothos in your house is really doing that much.
Let's see. Prodigal asked, but do the fish really care what plants are in the tank? I mean, no, we do.
No, I mean, I think that
I care what fish and plants.
Yeah, I mean, I think that rainbows, they are certainly happier in a planted tank than not. Now, do they care which plants? Not
I like to think that my
really.
rainbows are very picky, and
Okay.
they
All right.
admire our.
I think my rainbows don't like stem plants. Like they hate Rotalis.
They could be secretly judging me for all my stem plants. You
They
never
could be
know.
judging. They could be judging you. It's true. You know, I think that if you have plants that are herbivores, they'll be much more picky about which
Fish.
plants you grow in. Particular plants that are herbivores. I meant fish that are herbivores. Plants that are herbivores. How's that going to work? But you know, they might want the tastier plants. So
Yeah. So Neo Veritas, great question. I think we've been asked this before. Like, what would be the parts per million of CO2 be in nature in a natural waterway? Which depends.
Yeah. So like the Pantanal of Brazil, which is where a lot of aquarium plants come from. It's really beautiful. I think Chris Luke Haupt on his channel has shown some underwater footage.
It looks like a freaking aquarium. It looks like a planted tank, like a CO2 injected planted tank.
Yeah, and it naturally has like 20 or 30 ppm of CO2 in the water. So there are bodies of water in nature that have a lot of CO2 in them. So for instance,
San Marcos.
San Marcos River. So I went to the San Marcos River years ago, which if you live near San Antonio, which is where the University of San Marcos is, the San Marcos River runs through the town. And it's a shallow river with like a white sandy bottom, and like you can just walk along it, and it's a slow moving, it's really pretty, tons of plants growing in it. And I would suggest you do this because it's a great way to spend a day. And
great
tons
article
of plants
from the 2 Hour Aquarist, where they actually have some reported.
Oh, the Crystal River. Yeah, that's a great example. I've always wanted to go to the Crystal River because I want to see the manatees.
So yeah,
and
massive
Chris
flow coming out of.
He has some pictures on his channel of that.
This is Tom
Barr's
in
Germany that there's a spring in Germany that Chris has taken photos of, and then in Madison, Wisconsin, in Lake Wingra, if you're by there are springs there that are just bubbling out of the earth, and you can see the bubbles rising from the earth. And there's tons of watercress growing around that I've eaten before. And so the reason for that is so Lake Wingra is over a limestone bed. And what happens is there's like rot and decay that forms organic acids that seeps into the cracks.
Yeah.
And then that mixes with the limestone, and the chemical reaction liberates CO2 and it bubbles on out of it. And so that's naturally a little higher CO2 also.
It eats holes through the rocks.
Literally,
that's where like Texas Holy Rock comes from.
Yep.
From the
there are tons of aquatic plants growing in Lake Wingra, many of them detrimentally, because like they have a big problem with runoff into the lakes there. So people who fertilize their lawns, golf courses, or just run off in the streets, and like phosphate levels are high and other nutrient levels are high. And when nutrient levels are too high and you have limitless light, right, because it's a lake, and you have natural CO2 bubbling up, what happens is it gets choked out with plant life, and these waterways become eutrophic, and that kills fish. Yeah. So it's not good for them.
Big Spring, Headwater, California. This is 40 ppm.
40 ppm. Wow, that's really high.
That's like the max I'm willing to do with CO2 injection.
But the fish that are there are evolved to like be okay with that, whereas not all fish are. So
Giant Springs, Montana, 25 ppm. Here's a nice chart of some other ones.
And I bet so I went canoeing in the Manistee River in Michigan, in northern Michigan, not the UP, but like the northern lower peninsula. And that's it's very low KH water. It's very acidic water. It's like root beer colored because of all the tannins from the bogs coming into it. And so It's really low KH. Tons of aquatic plants, tons of Vallisneria and other plants because it's so low KH. I wonder what the CO2 levels are in that. Doesn't need to be that high though, because I'm guessing the KH is really, really low.
I think the main takeaway though from all of these high CO2 places in nature is comparing that to a non-injected tank and how much less we are working
It's going to
with
be
in a closed
really,
system.
really low. And it depends on what your KH is, you know, and it depends on like what your substrate is and stuff like that. That can influence it too.
Oh yeah, there's another question about that I will get to.
Yeah, so
well.
water conductivity. So what conducts electricity are ions. So ions are charged atoms. So like sodium, potassium, magnesium. Some of those are important nutrients. Some of them are not. Some of them they actively dislike. So plants hate sodium, but sodium conducts electricity too.
Not a fan of chloride either.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't really like chloride. I mean, whereas we do need chloride, like we need it in our gut transporters. And if you have like a mutation in your chloride transporter, that's what causes it's a heritable disease. It's a heritable disease. It's a respiratory heritable disease. It's the most common inherited disease. Hang on.
Oh, cystic fibrosis.
Cystic fibrosis. Thank you. That's it's a chloride transporter mutation. So chloride balance is important for us. But yeah, plants don't really like chloride. That has a negative charge. They don't really like sodium. They like potassium. They like nitrate. They don't mind nitrate. They like nitrite. We hate nitrite. They like ammonium ions. We don't.
That's our favorite.
Yeah. So, but the thing is is if you're just measuring conductivity, it's not telling you what ions there are. It's just telling you what charge is moving through. So like conductivity is a good measure just to see how pure your water is. And that's about it. Kind of like TDS is a good measure of just how pure your water is, but it doesn't tell you what dissolved solids are in there.
So this is a Mandarin Gobi asking a disease question, which when it comes to that, I am out. So
so people who are good to ask about that, Johnny at Dance Fish, and he's on Fishcord, he knows a lot, and Rebecca, she hangs out on Fishcord too. You can also go to her channel, Freshwater Ichthyology. She knows a lot more about diseases than I do, and I'm just not that knowledgeable about that. And I would hate to give you bad advice because I also don't have a lot of experience with diseases. So those are the people I would go to.
Yeah. And then another non-plant question, but in my experience, so Nathan's asking, are rainbows dramatic when moving to another tank? I moved them. They're staying at the top of the water now.
Not really.
I've not had that issue
dramatic. So in my experience, they only hang out at the top of the water if your CO2 is on too high and they're choking, in which case I would do a water change. Doing a water change is always a good thing for rainbows. Rainbows love water changes. But no, I don't think they're dramatic. Like they color up really quick. Like when I buy rainbows from like Dance Fish or I order them from
they're eating within the like putting them in the tank, unboxing, and
they color up within a couple hours. So I would say that they are not dramatic at all. I mean, there are fish who are way more dramatic than rainbows. Nathan, I can't get over your name change, and I don't know who you are because I keep forgetting that you've changed your names. And I'm like, oh, who's Gills to Garden again? So you should change your name back because it's not working for me. It's just not working. It's not working. This is not working.
So Fishy Business has a small blackbeard algae problem. Noticed it's more prominent closer to my CO2 diffuser and a power head opposite for circulation. Can the flow and proximity to CO2 cause this? I don't know about the proximity to CO2, but when I get blackbeard, it starts on the spray bar. It starts on the power heads.
Yeah, it does. And sometimes like that will be The only blackbeard algae I've had in 5 years is on the outtake of my spray bar, which I don't really care about because it's not on the plant, so I don't care. I don't know why that happens. If it's only on your spray bar, I would not care in the slightest. If it's on your plants, I would just get rid of any infected tissue. I would not fuck around. I would, like, if it's on your Anubias leaves or your Java ferns, I would just cut those
because
leaves
that's
off,
the thing.
throw them out.
Like algae is sly and opportunistic, and
Mhm.
whenever it grows on a plant like that, and that means that leaf is not doing what it's supposed to do, and it's on its way out, and the algae has
Yeah.
detected that the leaf can't defend itself, and
Yeah,
so
your plant will grow new leaves. It will grow new leaves. It's not a sacrifice. It will grow more. Just cut them off, throw them out.
the
So
power head is opposite of where the diffuser is, so it's closer to the CO2 diffuser. I mean, whatever
maybe it's not. Yeah,
happened
I
with
mean,
it, it
hard to say.
wants to grow there for whatever reason. That's the other thing, is like, we don't like, people like to cite correlations with algae growth, but we don't actually know
Yeah,
precisely
we
what
don't actually
triggers
know.
algae.
Yeah, I mean, like in general, I've noticed that algae sometimes will collect where there's not enough circulation, except for BBA. I get it only on the outflow of my spray bar. That's it. So that one apparently likes a lot of flow, but it's not on any of my other leaves, so I don't care. If it's on hardscape or like filter outflows, what I would do is remove those and I would put hydrogen peroxide on them, and it will turn purplish and die, and your fish will pick at it, and like it'll kill it right away. You can also take a syringe of hydrogen peroxide and you can like spot treat things with it. But if you have infected leaves, just cut them out and throw them out. That's the best. Just do that first.
So, and now I'm gonna get back to regular chat because that's the last one that I starred. Just keep in mind, this one was from about 20 minutes ago. So that's where I was with catching questions. So the question from Rich Peltz: can aquatic plants take up CO2 through their roots in the substrate?
So every single plant cell can potentially take up CO2, but they don't really.
Now,
it's not going to help the plant unless there's chlorophyll there. There's chloroplast there, right? So plants are not like animals are, that have they do circulate some things. Like, they don't have a circulatory system like we do, right? Like, I'm only taking in O2 through my mouth, and then my blood takes it to the rest of my body. So plants don't exactly do that. They do have some tissue for transport. This is called phloem, and that will transport like nutrients, so sugars, some dissolved NPKs, ions, things like that. They don't really have circulatory systems. So even if a plant is taking CO2 through the roots, it's not doing it any good there because there's no chloroplasts. And they're not going to have chloroplasts in the root because there's no light in the roots.
So what is the point of substrate in a planted tank in aquatic plants?
I mean, it does take in nutrients through roots, and root tissue is evolved to take in
significantly more efficient
and dissolved ions. So it has, now back to where Stephen was talking about those ion transporters, or I guess I was, like, it has a lot. The cells, they're called root hairs. So, if you see like a famous root, like a carrot, okay, that's a big tap root. And then it has like little hairs that come off it, like bigger ones. But then even tinier than that, they're one cell thick. They're called root hairs. And root hairs, they have specialized cell types just for taking up water and ions, nutrient ions. So NPKs, micronutrients, things like that. So, since it has a lot of those specialized cells, that's not to say that it can't take in nutrients through their leaves and stuff, but it has more ion transporters, more special tissue for that in the roots than not, because that's how plants are evolved. But as for taking up CO2, even if they could take it up, which maybe they are passively taking up some, it doesn't do them any good. because
And
they don't
then
really clear. Yeah.
combine the fact that like active substrate, high cation exchange substrate has the ability to sequester a lot more
Yes, that's the other
higher
thing.
concentration of nutrients at the
Yes.
substrate level, more
So
than
positively charged ions
Mhm.
will exchange on high cation exchange capacity substrates. So magnesium, calcium, anything with a positive charge. So, but CO2, no. The plants just they don't have circulatory systems like we do.
So Ames has a Neo CO2 kit. I'm not sure what that is, but she just wants to know, is it's old, does CO2 stuff expire?
So is that the one where you mix the citric acid and the baking soda? I think it is.
Let me check it out.
Because if it is, they don't expire as long as they haven't gotten wet. Like if you've mixed the two substrates and gotten them wet, then they're expired.
Okay. Oh yeah, it is. It's one of those DIY kits. Gotcha.
Yeah, as long
But yeah,
as
just avoiding moisture. It's
don't as long as the substrates aren't mixed and they're not wet, then they're okay. But if you've gotten them wet and mixed them, you need to buy new substrates. But I have never used this kit. I can't endorse it or not. That's all I can tell you. Maybe someone in the chat will know more.
So now I am down basically at the bottom of the chat. If we missed a question, please ask it again, because there's a lot that came through. So we're just going to start with bottom of the chat with Barbara's question. Do various algae like different kinds of water, minerals, etc.? I see people who have BBA issues don't seem to have green soft string algae, or is it just coincidence?
Yeah. I mean, sure. I've noticed, between living in Iowa and living here, I don't get BBA ever. I get other algae. Different algae have evolved to different environments. I can't
Do you
really
get a lot
say
of
what that is.
Cladophora?
Get a lot of what?
Cladophora?
No, I get like string algae. I get like dust algae. I get like green spot algae. That's more what I get. So, whereas like I got tons of BBA when I lived in Iowa. I don't know, something different about that water. I can't say. And maybe it may not be a KH issue. Could be something else in the tap water too. Maybe some other dissolved solid that they like or not like. It's hard to say.
Yeah, it is not very well known. It's more like we kind of know how to curb it, and we know all these correlations with it. We don't know how to induce it.
Yeah, and even if you're a very experienced plant grower, I just want everyone in the chat to I think it's important that you know that everybody still gets algae on occasion. Yeah. Even if you inject CO2, even if you're Tombar, even if you're
it's ready to take over when things suck for the plants.
And sometimes algae it happens to the best of us. So
there is no algae-free tank in my house. There is just low algae, pretty low algae in most of them now.
I mean,
I've started lowering the light. Things are better.
Yeah, but algae is something that just is a part of the hobby. It shouldn't feel bad.
And embrace it. If it can be useful depending on your goals. For an aquatic garden, you're still going to have it, but if your plants are growing well, it's going to very vastly outcompete it.
Yeah.
So Fishy Business says, will fast growers like water lettuce and pogo octopus outcompete other plants for nutrients other than nitrates? Nitrates are 20 to 50 parts per million average, but epiphytes not strong and struggle with algae auto-dosing EI.
I mean, so if you're auto-dosing EI, you don't have any shortage of any NPK. You may have shortage of CO2. You may not have enough light. Pogo octopus can grow so much that it's choking out your tank for light. I mean, I've had that happen.
It can also consume CO2 faster than atmospheric
Sure.
equilibrium can bring it back in, which is where
Yeah.
the biggest choke point is, I think, especially with the nubius, like epiphytes like that.
I mean, I think that the biggest choke point is like it blocks light, honestly, because it grows so fast.
Yeah, I mean, but like when we're talking about Anubias and stuff, like it just depends on how much light's there in the first place. Because
Even then, I
I've got
mean,
stuff like I have that one tank, which I don't have a par meter to compare it, but like I've got Anubias growing quite well in a very, very low light environment
it does, but
with
I
no
think
CO2.
people underestimate how much like floating plants and certain things shade their other plants.
Yeah.
Like, and this is a problem outside too. Like light levels are like, I don't know, the number one thing I think about in outdoor gardening, like
Oh
that
yeah,
and
for sure.
watering. So like,
That I mean that's like unlimited access to CO2.
yeah, but I think
You got a
about
lot
light
more
and
wiggle
water
room.
all the time. Like, oh, I
Mhm.
don't know, there's not enough light to grow this plant there, and you know, or like, oh, I'm shading, like a tree is shading out something else. So, you know,
Yeah, so like this light is so low because literally I've got the stupid LED strip this is like a Fluval Flex kit. I got the
yeah.
LED strip wet, and so like half of them the diodes don't work. And it was an accident that I found that things grew a hell of a lot better when I reduced the light, like
Anubias
forcefully
does
reduced the
not
light.
mind being shaded. I will agree with
Right.
that. It is a lower light plant.
Yeah, and like and look, that's bulbitis in the back. You can't even see it because it's so fucking shaded back there. But
Right.
it's fine.
But like
It's such a slow metabolizer.
Lotus octopus can shade a lot of things. A
If you
lot of
let it,
things.
absolutely.
So, and if you are injecting CO2, consider getting rid of that plant because it just grows too fucking fast to deal with.
Even
Like
for member plants, I'm like, look, I can't do this anymore.
it's
It's too
too
much.
much. Also, Jenna hates it and she deserves better.
She does.
Yeah. But I mean, I had Pogosim and Stellatus octopus in this tank for like 3 weeks because I wanted something fast growing to just break in the tank.
Hydrogen peroxide, is there a rule of thumb when using it? What's too much?
I don't know. I mean, I've heard of people like dumping a whole bottle in there, like as an emergency oxygen producer for fish. I don't really want to do
Yeah.
that. I don't
It
think you
depends on
need.
how you're using it. Like localized, if you turn off your flow and just kind of do localized
That would be my
injection,
recommendation is just doing
you can,
localized, just because it's not usable. It's not useful to just dump it in. It's better to like spot treat it
yeah, the
to do that.
concentration of it is what makes the cells
Yeah.
explode,
But it's
basically.
not going to harm your fish because when hydrogen peroxide reacts, the byproducts of
Unless
that
you get it like spray it straight on their gills, like
right.
that's the thing. Like you have to really
You have to really try.
try.
And it's not going to happen. But the byproducts of that reaction are water and oxygen,
Mhm.
neither of which will harm your fish. So like I've heard of people like just dumping a whole bottle in there, but that's not going to be really effective anyways. Just spot treat it with a syringe, but you can spot treat as much as you like.
You've heard of that 1-2 punch algae treatment? Where
No,
it's
what's
like
that?
I mean, I am hesitant to even describe it because I don't recommend it. It's stupid.
Because
But
somebody might do it, and I don't want
yeah,
to
it
dump
involves like first dumping some hydrogen peroxide in there and letting it flow around, followed by a water change, followed by Excel, or maybe it's vice versa.
Oh, there's all
Either
kinds of
way,
garbage
don't be
like that.
dumb. Grow
I would
plants.
just say to not even give money to CChem for Excel or
Agreed.
any other company that makes any other kind of glutaraldehyde product. Don't give them their money. Don't give them your money or their money. Don't give them any money because it's a toxin. It's a nasty poison. You shouldn't be exposing your skin to it, let alone your fish. Like it's gross. Have you ever
Not good.
smelled it smells like chemical.
It smells like poison. Like it.
Because it is poison. It's a carcinogen. Like, just don't use it.
Yeah. So this is This
Oh
is the
God.
allelopathy thing.
Oh,
Yeah, we don't. Well, so I
let's
will
talk about
say,
allelopathy.
I
Let's
will
just
say, I
talk
did
about
find
it.
a study. I did find a
Let's.
study from
So
the
here's what
80s
allelopathy is. So
that said
let's
that this.
just deal with this now, okay?
Ah, here we go.
So there are many examples of allelopathy documented in nature. So what allelopathy is when you have a plant that is living in an environment where it is very resource limited. So the classic examples would be like desert plants or tall trees, okay? So desert plants, they are resource limited for water. So in order for a desert plant like, so let's say creosote bush or like sagebrush, if you see them growing in their natural environment, they are not distributed randomly, right? So like if I were to take like, some sprinkles and throw them on the ground, right? They would not land in a perfect grid. But those plants grow in a perfect grid. And that tells you that there is something forcing that perfect spacing. And it's because they are secreting an inhibitory molecule through their roots to prevent other plants from growing by them and taking up all their water. So that creates a concentration gradient. So right by the root, you have the highest concentration of chemical, and then it decays to the point where it's low enough that another plant can grow there because it's below its threshold of inhibition. Okay, so where it can't grow. So to get allelopathy, you must have a concentration gradient. So a concentration gradient means it's high here and low here. Well, what happens if we try to form a concentration gradient in our aquariums? You can try this experiment. Go to your cabinet and get out the blue food coloring.
Yeah.
Or use some Icex. Put a drop in there.
The thing is, too, it's like, how would hornwort know that it's in a box versus it's in a lake?
Right. That's the other thing. But the concentration gradient, it goes away. Allelopathy absolutely requires two things: resource stress and a concentration gradient. Now, hornwort in the wild is not resource stressed. It has all the light it wants because it can grow throughout the whole damn lake. And then the other nutrients it has, well, they're all diffused evenly throughout the lake. So it's not a issue. The other famous example of allelopathy are walnut trees. So if you've ever tried to garden near a walnut tree, you might notice that things don't grow real well. That's because walnut trees secrete a compound called juglone, and that inhibits the growth of other plants. But that's because there's some resource limitation going on, because walnut trees get really tall. If you have too many of them growing up, they'll shade other walnuts out. And so you don't want them growing too close together. But there's no resource stress for hornwort. Okay. I challenge you to find one case in the literature of allelopathy.
Well, I
Not going to
did
be one.
see
There's not
so
going to
I
be.
have to look through Wallsted's book again, because she had, she had brought it up a long time ago. But there was, and I know there was a study cited from the 80s that it can inhibit phytoplankton and cyanobacteria, not like
That's
warfare per
phytoplankton.
se.
It's not a
It's not.
vascular plant.
Right.
And it's from the 80s. Good luck finding one. A
Yeah,
credible study. Good luck with that. Good luck.
Yeah,
Do a
yeah,
search
yeah.
on PubMed. Go for it. Yeah, you're not going to find one. That's because you
I'm
need
going
a
to go
concentration
to
gradient.
I'm right confirmationbias.com/chatgpt, and I will
Just
make
go to
something
PubMed.
up.
You don't have to go to a fake thing. Just go to PubMed. That's what it's there for.
Let's see. There were some more
So
questions.
people use allelopathy because they want to hand wave around the fact that they can't fucking grow a plant.
Yeah.
You know what? And their plants I can't grow. But it's not because of allelopathy. It's because I can't grow them.
We don't
and you
talk
can
about those
find
plants.
someone else, I bet, who is able to grow hornwort with that plant. So why would they not have allelopathy, but you do?
Juanita, thanks for becoming a member.
Thank you, Juanita. Rant over.
Re-upping.
Rant
Uh,
over.
do we have a process before adding new plants? I rinse and tap water
Yeah,
and
I rinse in tap water, yeah. And then I just plant it. You know
I
what
rinse
else
and
I
tap
do?
water just to get all the like anything that
Gunk.
decayed in transit, basically.
Oh, here's another thing I do. I throw it in my tank and I forget about it for a week because
Yeah,
I
because
never
it's gonna
plant something
suck.
right away because I
It's
don't
gonna.
plant it till I have time. I leave it in its pot for 3 weeks.
You gotta let it curl at a 90-degree angle before.
No. So I do that, but no, I don't
uh,
really have a process. I don't quarantine plants. I don't think that's necessary. I
yeah,
certainly
because
don't.
I don't care about it coming with algae because I prevent algae my own way.
It'll have spores of algae whether you want it to or not.
The air
That
we
is
breathe, the
Yeah,
air we
there's
breathe
algae
has
spores everywhere. As for diseases, fish diseases, plants don't carry fish diseases. They
planaria. Too late, already got it.
Yeah, snails. I like snails. I'm pro
I love
snail.
snails. My puffers, 3 out of 3 puffers agree that snails in this house
I
are
don't
great.
even have any, but Jake really likes the snails, so I'm okay with snails. The tap water rinse is just like if you have any like a little bit of decay, because
Yeah, that's
sometimes
what I do
if
it
it
for.
sits in the mail a little too long, I
Yeah,
sprinkle it.
leaves slough off,
Sometimes
and
I forget though, and I don't do that. But I definitely don't want to like dip it in potassium permanganate. Like I'll like get it on my nice white sweater.
let's talk about reverse respiration.
Let's not, because
Okay.
no, I don't feel like it because that's bullshit.
Well, Whip asked about shitty regulators, so I was just like, let's come up with it's all the trigger points that have come up in the stream. So Ames wants to know, what about snails and flower shrimp? Okay with CO2?
I don't know what flower shrimp
I
are.
don't know either. I mean, I have found
Snails are,
that more
yeah.
resilient. I mean, snails, the issue with CO2 is the acidity.
Yeah, and the thing is like I have lots of snails in my tank. My KH is not that low. My KHs and GH are about 6.
Mm.
If you have like no KH and you inject CO2, it's pretty hard to keep snails alive in that. If you want the best looking, healthiest snails, you will have high KH, high GH, and not inject CO2. Like if you want to raise some like prize winning mystery snails, you will not inject CO2 because what happens
Right.
is the acidic environment dissolves their shell, and their shell is made of calcium carbonate. And they also have trouble building shell in an acidic environment, especially and one that has no GH. So I have plenty of snails, though. Their shells don't look super great, but they've lived a long time. I've had Cleathon snails for years, and they've gotten
Oh,
bigger.
they do really well. Yeah.
Yeah, they're scuffed up though. They're scratched up and scuffed up. They never have the prettiest shells. I would never win like the Clash snail competition. So,
JP Jeffries, thank you for becoming a member, and says he has a 125-gallon rainbow tank. Excellent.
wonderful.
With sparse jungle val and dwarf sag. I've been reluctant to turn on the 2 900 Shark Pros. I guess those are those are internal filters, I think.
Okay.
Because I've heard the flow will over oxygenate and cause lots of algae.
I don't think so. I'll say that the rainbows love flow, and plants love flow. They get less algae with more flow, in my experience. I'm actually probably going to add another power head to this tank because I want more flow. So I would turn those on. I would feel no qualms about it at all.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, if it's so powerful that they're literally like blowing away when they get close to it, that might, but they might
There is
enjoy
a
that too.
point where rainbows like are getting too much flow, but they really do like flow. I mean, they come from rivers.
I've had
Not
fish
all of them. Some
that
come
go
from
up to the
lakes,
spray
but
bars just so the spray
yeah.
bar will take them across the tank.
Yeah, in my
Just for
experience, the
fun.
rainbows will like to play in the flow.
Yeah.
They do really like it. So try turning it on. I think you'll be happy.
Do we know about manatees starving due to seagrass loss?
I mean, I know that they have a lot of habitat loss, that's a problem. And I know that like boats hitting them is a big problem. If you
Ouch.
boat on the Crystal River, you need to slow the fuck down. Like, don't hit manatees.
I mean, why would you go fast on the Crystal River? Like,
Just take your time, you know, just stop and watch the manatees, you know, look at the aquatic plants, just enjoy your day. You don't need to go so fast.
mhm.
I don't know what's causing the seagrass loss. It might be heating of the water from climate change. It could be runoff from farms. I don't know. I'm not educated about that. But I do know that manatees are threatened, and I know that their habitats, a lot of them are protected. And I know that you should go slow on the Crystal River. Bamboo shrimps.
Never had them.
I've never had them, but I've heard of people injecting CO2 with them, and it's fine. But I have never kept them before. So maybe someone in the chat has, though, and they can give you some advice. My guess is they'd be just fine.
Oh, Zen's trying.
You know, I don't like crochet. It's too much twisty motion. I find that really uncomfortable. Orange cats are weird, though. I would agree with you.
It's hard to argue with that.
On that.
Has anyone
crochet
used?
is really good for toys.
Mm.
Knitting is better for garments, though, than crochet is. Crochet is a lot faster. It's a lot faster.
Anyone use paintball CO2 canisters for their small planted tanks? I have 2 small tanks currently cycling. I would like to inject CO2 for the plants.
I haven't.
I mean, it's the same thing as pressure. Yeah, it's substantially less in a container. So
I think it's a good system for small tanks and small spaces. Like more than like, let's say 15 gallons, just get a regular regulator.
So like a paintball canister is like 24 ounces or something.
I was gonna say about most. 20 ounces, 30
versus you like this. You can get a 2.5 pound, or you can get a 5 pound. So it's just you're refilling it more often, and if you're willing to do that,
small spaces and small tanks don't use a lot of CO2. And if I recall, Daniel Velez has super low KH water, so he's not going to be injecting that much CO2. So yeah, if you got a little tank, go for it. Plants that are imported and required to be sprayed with pesticides. You know, that is a good question to ask Aquarium Co-op on, because I am not educated about import laws. He might know. Corey might know.
Yeah, I don't know about that. Like,
yeah, I'm not aware of things. I don't import plants, but I'm not aware that they have to be sprayed before they're distributed. They might be sprayed as during their growing process. And that's another reason to rinse them, though.
Yeah, like if they have to be sprayed with pesticides, I certainly wouldn't buy from your average plant flipper, the ones that import the plants, and before they even take them out of the bag, they're shipping off to a buyer.
Yeah, I don't buy. They need to at least have put it in a tank for a few days. I mean, Aquarium Co-op, they put all they acclimate their plants for at least a little bit, so that's never going to be a problem. But I don't know if they're encountering plants sprayed with pesticides, if that's an issue. That'd be annoying. I don't think so, though. I mean, like, because is like the USDA opening boxes and spraying them? I don't think so.
Or maybe it's like a possibility that they would require that, because
I'm not aware of that.
If people got wind of that, that would just be another prevalent thing on Facebook of like, what's going on with my fish? Their first reply would be like, were your plants sprayed with pesticides before you bought them? And then that like becomes the new thing.
You know, and I don't think that's even an issue with growing them, because like I'm not aware of. I mean, there are lots of pests with terrestrial plants, insect damage, but I'm not aware of like any pesticide that would work on aquatic plants, because you can have herbivory by a pest, but it's not going to be something that's helped by a pesticide. So I don't think that's an issue, really.
So Nathan's asking, could that be why my Bosemani's are staying at the top? The tank I moved them into has more flow, went from 2 HOBs to 1 canister filter flowing down the whole tank.
I
But
mean,
what are they doing at the top? Are they
yeah,
gasping
like,
and are they
they like
sluggish?
gasping at the surface, or are they just chilling at the top? Because
Yeah.
sometimes rainbows like to be at the top, you know, especially like littler rainbows seem to like it more than bigger rainbows. Because like right now, I'm looking at my fish right now, and like the littler rainbows are chilling more at the top, and the bigger ones are chilling more at the bottom. That just seems to be what they do. So, but they're not gasping. Like, if they were stressed, they would be angled toward the surface.
Are there any specific plant nutrients? Rachel, who lives in the PNW, wants to know, what should she be keeping an eye on or adding to her PNW water?
I'm guessing you have that magic low pH
where
water.
there's basically nothing.
Pretty
I mean,
awesome. So you may need, even if you don't inject CO2, you probably should use some fertilizer, just because your water is so low pH that you have a lot of bioavailable CO2 and your plants will grow fairly well. So
I would say like an all-in-one, but
yeah.
a calcium and magnesium are usually lacking in an all-in-one in substantial amounts. So that would be like the main thing.
pH boost, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which you should use anyways at GH boost, because your fish needs some. Now, how much is some? I don't know. And some fish might need more than others, right? Like live bearers need maybe a little more.
Possibly, yeah.
Like when they need more than 0. What do you remineralize to? Because you have no GH.
I eyeball it so much that it could be 3, it could be 8. You know, it kind of varies. Like I just, as long as there's some in the water, I don't have issues with plants, so like or
a couple degrees, right? Like,
yeah, I mean,
not less than 2. Let's put it that way.
And this is a great point that Luke brought up about the paintball canisters. It's not just the size difference, but they have less pressure to start with, and so as they deplete, you know, they're not going to stay at that inlet pressure that you need.
I've never used one, so I can't say, just because I've always thought that, like, might as well just buy a big regulator because it's more versatile in case like I get a bigger tank or want to use it on a different tank. But if you're really space constrained, I mean, that's a reason to use it.
Yeah, see, Alec Kumanov said imported plants don't have to be sprayed as long as pest or disease free. Luke said they're sprayed pre-export if they're sprayed. Legal export requires a phytosanitary certificate.
True. Yeah, I am not aware of plants being sprayed as an issue. If you're worried about that, buy from a good retailer who does some acclimation of their plants. Like Aquarium Co-op is a good example. Like everything that they get in goes into a tank for at least a little while. And rinse your plants. Rinse them in tap water. So, but I'm not worried about that.
So is it a no-no? Garage Gills wants to know, is it a no-no to use a CO2 system to get plants established in a tank and then moving the system to a different tank?
I mean, it's kind of okay. Like I would just leave it on the same tank and then like grow plants like a farm and then use the farm to populate your fish room. Because the thing is like when you're constantly taking CO2 on and off.
Yeah, it would be more of a disruption to the whole system.
Chance of getting algae with that,
rather than the individual plant. Yeah.
That's a chance of there's a good chance of getting algae with that. I would just designate like your biggest display tank. I would put CO2 on that and you will find it is very productive. I mean, this fall, I trimmed these 2 tanks. I literally had a trash bag of plants, and there was still plenty of plants left that I took to sell. So I could have used that personally and like planted, I don't know, 20 or 30 more tanks with it. So I would just make one.
Is the magic solution to plants for profit is CO2 injection.
Yeah, but it's also the magic solution to getting lots of plants for your fish room.
Yeah,
So
when you're buying plants, that's kind of what's happening. If you're buying them for your low tech tank, they're coming from a CO2 injected environment usually. If it's a good plant seller
if
and they
they're
know how to
yeah,
get those plants established and converted, and are not just
right.
flipping them around to you, then they have CO2 injected
Hmm.
growth from
That's what Aquarium Co-op does. They inject CO2.
yeah.
So and um, I mean they don't acclimate their plants the whole way. Like their crypts
I mean, yeah, there's a
are
mix
dying back.
of both types of leaves, but it's just like, here's verification that this plant was indeed alive and growing and
Yeah,
converting and getting it started.
yeah. But they grow them in CO2. So that's what I would do. Have a display farm on your
But
biggest, nicest tank.
if you do take something like a whole system off of CO2, there is an adjustment period. I would recommend whatever lighting level you have, at least for the time being, lower it, because the adjustment period is gonna be a little bit harsh on the whole
Yeah.
system.
The other thing too is it's kind of a pain in the ass to set up a tank for CO2. So for instance, like I have plumbed in to my outflow diffuser. So
Mhm.
moving that is not a trivial amount of work. And then there's like moving the regulators and all the tubing and everything. Like it's a certain amount of work to do that I would not want to like musical tank that.
Yeah, that would be annoying for me too.
All right. Nathan says, see, I'm still not adjusting to the name Nathan. This is just not working.
7 of the 10 rainbows are more or less hanging out. The other 10 are angled, like you mentioned. None of the other fish are doing this. So 7
Do
are
a
starting
water
to
change.
mature.
Do a big
Yeah.
water change. Raise your spray bar. They're stressed. They're stressed. Do a big like 75% water change. Raise your spray bar. They'll be okay. Yeah.
All right. Let's see. How did the likes go down one? Uh-oh, we lost. Zen's getting people to hit the like, but
Oh no.
we
You know
lost the
what?
like.
Maybe people didn't like my allelopathy rants. Maybe there are a lot of
Sometimes
like
we say
pro
unpopular
allelopathy
things.
people.
It's okay.
Mhm.
We're as controversial as YouTube will allow us to be, I believe. So,
Geek Boy, would you be so generous as to please request troops in COC? I needed to complete this clan game. Take your gaming business elsewhere, Scotty. Stay on topic.
we made a Fishcord channel for that bullshit.
That's right. That stupid game.
Uh-huh. What's up, Ted? Ted Coletti just entered the chat, said allelopathy
Hey,
rant
Ted.
rock.
Happy belated birthday, Ted.
That's right. Birthday this weekend.
Happy birthday.
And he is donating a signed copy of the Pond Tub Handbook, or the Tub Pond. I don't know. He referred to it as his boring book.
I love his
to
book. I
the
love his
Foxy
book.
and
It's a great book. This is
I
a book
thought I
I
had it on hand,
personally
but
recommend.
but he's donating it to the Foxy and Peplin auction happening April 12th.
Nice.
And if you, viewer, would also like to donate something to benefit their wedding and the pizza party afterwards, you can email Foxy's Fishes at fishfam.link by Saturday, soon. Now,
Cool.
just do it now.
Just do it now.
Yeah.
And then the auction will be the 9th, right?
12th.
12th.
Saturday, April 12th at 5 p.m. Central, right here.
Yep.
With people.
And the wedding, everyone is invited. It is Friday night of the Clash, right? Or is it Thursday night?
It's Friday night.
It's Friday night. But everybody's invited. It'll be a good party.
Yeah.
Good party.
All right. CO2 in my sump, Big Steve. Okay. Would it make any difference if I put the diffuser in the tank or in the sump? As far as gassing off, does it make a difference?
I mean, you might need to inject a more in your sump, because as it like trickles out of your sump into the tank, if there's bubbling, like I don't know what your outflow of your sump looks like. It could be off gassing. So you want to just measure that you're getting like at least a point of pH drop. If I recall, your KH is pretty low, Big Steve. So if you are getting some CO2 loss, you can just turn it up and it's not that big of a deal. Now, if you have high KH water, there's a certain point where you just can't turn it up any higher. and then you want to like
Giving
be
it
a
all
little
she's
more.
got.
Yeah, it's difficult, but yeah, I would just measure that you're getting, if you want to do it the easier way, you could measure with a drop checker, but you can also just look for at least a point of pH drop about, let's say, 45 minutes after the lights come on.
You end up producing less when you top them all the time and toss the bottom. I've been doing that a lot more too, Luke, because it looks so much better when you got your display tank. When like those bottoms get decrepit, like you can trim them 3 times, but like I am getting to the point where I'm not afraid of losing a plant now. So like I will top once, bottom gone, replant top.
But the thing is that just takes a lot of fucking work, which is why I don't like stems. Like, can you imagine having a tank full of rotallas? Oh, wait, that's Luke Wong's life. I mean, just endless trimming stems every week.
I let my 90 in the last week or two just get completely encumbered with rotallas for the member plant shipment. It was a lot though. Like that was a lot. That's too much rotalla.
Yeah, just because doing a quick like chop it and let it regrow, that's one thing, but like chopping, replanting, oh man, that's a lot.
I like it. It's rewarding work.
I don't. I find
it's therapeutic.
I find zero therapy or reward from it. Yeah.
I enjoy the weekend staying up till 7 a.m. doing plant work.
It's 7 a.m. I like to be asleep.
Yeah. It's a good goal to be asleep
at 7 a.m. I like to be asleep. Stephen likes writing me agendas at 1 a.m. so I can find them on Monday morning.
That is when my mind is at peak efficiency.
It was 2 a.m. my time, so I was asleep.
Well, I'm glad you mute your phone.
I was peak asleep.
Oh, is his birthday today? I thought it was yesterday.
I thought it was yesterday. Happy birthday, Ted. I hope you're having a good day. I hope that your wife makes you a cake and that your family has a good day with you. Whip says, well, I'm going to go marvel at how smart Kelley is and contemplate most of my life decisions. Have a great day, everyone. Or don't. At this point, I don't trust anything I have to say. Or don't.
Have a day.
Just have a day. Whip, I think you've made a lot of good decisions in life. I mean, for instance, you'll probably decide to have something for dinner that tastes good. That's an important decision.
And he had no control, no decision-making control over his water source.
It's true. You had no choice. And what are you going to do? You're not on city water. And even if you were, you can have terrible city water out of the tap. I did when I lived in Iowa. It's awful.
Well, la-ti-da, you got some nymphaea coming to you next week.
I'm so excited about that. I have not yet divided my dahlias because the weather has been crappy, and I don't like to do that in the house because it's messy. I like to do it outside. And I bought myself something I have been wanting forever, and I don't know why I didn't buy myself one. I bought a potting bench, which is, like a bench you keep outside that has like.
Oh, so you're not bent over or crouched or sitting on the grass?
Yeah, that it has a reservoir for the dirt. And yeah, so I finally bought a potting bench and I'm going to divide my dahlias at it. But it rained all weekend. We got a lot of rain and it's very chilly today. It's in the 40s. So I just didn't feel like doing it. I didn't feel like doing much this week.
This week, my goal, because I've got no excuse. There is no risk of frost. That's long gone. I need to repot my lily and my cannas, and I spent the last week or two trying to find a plug for my 625-gallon eyesore that's in the yard.
Oh God!
And with no success. And so I finally did the sensible thing. And I emailed the company and they're like, what's your address? We'll send one to you right now.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Yay.
That's great. So you can have a pretty big pond.
Yeah.
That's exciting.
It's going to be shaded. So I'll be a little bit
limited. I mean, so the lily that you have, I would divide it and I would try that one in there because One Visa does better in a shady environment than other water lilies, and it'll get pretty big. Like, so I would try that one. You're out nothing if it doesn't work.
Yeah.
Some of my lotuses, it might be okay. It's pretty shady. I don't know. At worst, they just won't bloom. Both those things. You'll just get foliage, which is something.
I bought 4 more feed pans, 3-gallon feed pans.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, that's good. Other water lilies, we could try like the Pink Beauty, because when I divide it, I can send you one. You can give it a try.
Okay. Yeah,
I mean,
why not?
Ted, what would you suggest for a shadier pond for plants?
Like,
I mean,
basically oak leaves blocking out as much sun as oak leaves can block
but it's
out.
huge. It's like what, 10 feet across?
It's 8 feet diameter, 2 feet tall.
Yeah, so space is not an issue, but light availability is more of an issue. But it's Louisiana sun, so it gets some. Oh, Helvula.
What is that?
Helvula is itty bitty. It's very tiny.
Oh, okay, yeah. For the
If you think that one would do well in lower light, I have that one, but I just divided it last year. And
are all of these just troll answers? Lizard tail, royal fern, yellow.
No, those are
flag?
not
Okay.
troll answers.
Because I have no idea.
I've never grown lizard tail unless it's the same thing as what's it called?
Sue Harkey's Colorado
It's
lily.
different, yeah. So there you go. Oh, Colorado is really pretty for water lilies. That's a pretty one. I've thought about growing that one. You have space. So yeah, if you think that one will grow well with a little shade, well, maybe a lot of shade.
James Bryden, that's just some dude.
That's a water lily. That's a water lily.
Ooh, that's a pretty flower on it.
Oh yeah, it's a water lily. They're all
Cool.
pretty. Colorado is one of my favorite water lilies. I would like to grow that one eventually, but I'm kind
all shade.
Cool. Yeah. But I think some of my lotuses might do okay. The Juan Visa, it won't bloom as much, but I think it might bloom some, and you're out nothing to try it. So
I need a screenshot the chat here. I can just go back on the replay and get it, because we are at almost 2 hours in. So
yeah, and I've got to do my corporate job some more. So
oh no, that sucks. Okay, well, we'll give all right, everybody gets 8 minutes of their time back, and
your time back.
or not. Scotty is starting his stream. Steen Fots will be streaming at 6, I believe. Hagen Hill will be doing their stream at 6 if they're scheduled. So yeah,
nobody gets any of their time back. There you go.
No time. All right.
Thank you, everyone. And we appreciate your questions and your comments and listening to my rants. And
always fun.
We'll do different rants next week, because what was the one I just ran out of steam? Reverse respiration.
Yeah, Allopathy, and we didn't touch on pH meters this time, but
you know, that rant can wait for another day. Yeah. Another week, another rant. You got a reason to come back for it, people. Who knows what I'll be enraged by next week. But thank you. Right. We're grateful for you all, and we'll see you next week.
Bye.
Bye.